Good evening, dear friends, and thank you for joining us once again this week for our lectures in our first chamber series. Today, we're going to go into the topic of transvaluation. And of all the lectures that you can take, allow us to tell you that this is right there, one of the very top ones that you need to take and that you actually need to comprehend. Because if you do not develop the love for the work, there will certainly be no progress being done. So allow us to say this. If you happen to feel like you have been going through these studies for quite a long time, that somehow you have become stagnant in your progress, stagnant beyond what would be the natural magnetic creative pause, then let us tell you that it is likely that you will find the reason behind that stagnation right here in this material that Samael shares with us. And let's start by saying this. Most people will be very satisfied and content with just reading the books, listening to the lectures, and not putting to use anything that they're learning. And this is something very common of many aspirants to becoming true Gnostic students. It is true that there is one thing that we all share together. And that one thing is that we are all looking for happiness. We would all certainly like to walk away of this space of misery and suffering and this constant battling the law of the pendulum. Because today we're happy and today we laugh, and later on we are deep into our suffering, sobbing in many cases, crying unconsolably. So most people, they're perfectly fine reading the books and they will buy the books. And we know of many cases where students have bought books and they have so many books that they're all stuffed in the shelves of their library. And nevertheless, they have not read them, but they have bought them. There are others who will buy the books and read them and will also partake of the lectures. As a matter of fact, perhaps there are many of you who listen to these lectures and then you go and listen to lectures in other groups and other organizations. But the thing is, that one thing that is very common is of those who get the books and read them, who partake of the lectures, but who do not do anything associated to the internal work. If we were going to put all that into some scales, we will see that the books and the lectures would be very heavy because there's a lot of that. And nevertheless, on how is it that they apply and put this teaching to use? Very light. It is not balanced. And Samael tells us, behold, this is what is serious. Because if we can listen to all these lectures, if we are receiving all of this wisdom that the Master has unveiled for us, if we become capable of extracting the symbols and visiting archaeological zones and seeing that whether it is in Central America or in Egypt or in Eastern Asia, we are seeing always the same teaching, consistently the same doctrine, giving us a lot of certainty that the teaching is what it is, and we don't use it, then what difference does it make? We all share this thing where we all would like to be happy. We all share this common condition where today we have lost of our senses and we have become unable to hold a conversation, to be able to confront. And when we say confront, we don't mean quarrel or argue. We mean to be able to be there and perceive the presence of divine beings, of being able to listen to the teaching directly from the words of the masters. We have lost that ability. That has all happened since that moment where we made that mistake and we were expelled from paradise. And we would like to regain that. We would like to awaken our faculties and we would like to see us making an internal progress and we would like to see our lives transformed. But the thing is, we are not putting to work the teaching. And Samael tells us, if you are not putting to work this teaching, It is because there is no comprehension of the work itself. Now we have to understand what that means, because Samael is very exact in the use of the word. And he does not make mistakes. Every day, we go through a myriad of circumstances where we are dealing with our own reactions, where we are dealing, and in many instances, just not even noticing and just going with the inferior flow of our inferior inhumanity. And even though it continues to make our lives complicated, even though it continues to bring suffering to us and to those who are around us, for some reason, we are not putting to work all of this teaching. So that means that we have to comprehend what is the Gnostic esoteric work. We have to be able to grasp what this is so that we can see it for the treasure that it is and put it to use. Because it seems to me, in my insignificant nothingness, that we are just taking this for granted. The great Master Jesus in the book of Matthew is quoted delivering this very same message that Samael gives us. Samael speaks in terms of transvaluation. The great Master Jesus does it in terms of parables. And what he shared back then, he stated again, the kingdom of heaven is like to a merchantman that seeketh good pearls, who having found a pearl of great price, he went and sold all that he had, and he bought it. And you see, we hear these parables, and we know that there is something very profound in that. It is very, very common to see many of us looking at the words of the great masters, and as we hear their teaching and hear their parables, not only we will feel that infusion of love, we will nod our heads and say, yes, I see what you're saying. But in reality, we're not. We're just becoming fascinated with the romanticism that exists behind the deep and profound love of those words. But we are not grasping the teaching. When the great Master Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like to a merchantman that was seeking good pearls, that means that there is a treasure that is within our grasp, and that if we really want it, like this merchantman, when we find it, like what has happened to us, that we have been able to come across this wisdom, this merchantman, he went and he sold all that he had and he bought it. He got everything that belonged to him, all of his values and everything that was of his possession, and he got rid of it so that he could afford that pearl. But we don't do that. We know that this is a treasure, but nevertheless, there are aspects inside of us that rebel against the work. And we know for a fact that we need to get rid of our anger, but we don't. And we know for a fact that we need to eliminate from ourselves our lust, but we don't. And we know that we need to eliminate all of those aspects of arrogance and intolerance and self-love, but we don't. We look at our defects, and it is very common for us to be so conditioned by the ego that we immediately become bored with this type of teaching. We hear these words, and when we hear them, we can accept them, but we are very slow to respond to the direction that they are offering us. Because we know that we have to eliminate our lust. And yet, we are very undisciplined in the use of our eyes. And whenever we see something that is attractive, our eyes just do their own thing. We would like to get rid of our anger. And we would perhaps even preach to others they should get rid of their anger. But all it takes is just somebody to honk the horn for 1 second too many against us. That is enough in many cases to ruin our day. So you see, we're constantly reacting. We have to do exactly what this merchant man on the parable does. He went and he sold all that he had. So that means that we really need to disconnect from all of the things of this world. For many of us, it's very difficult to disconnect from our CrossFit. It's too difficult to disconnect from our diets. It is very difficult to disconnect from our social status, from our academic degree. And until we disconnect from those things and we are willing to give all that away, we will not be able to acquire this precious treasure that is the doctrine and the wisdom of Gnosis. We tend to believe that we can continue relying on our incoherent patterns of thought because we tend to convince ourselves that we are in control of the things that happen around us, of the things that happen in our own lives, and we even believe that we can originate changes and new things. Nevertheless, we're still stuck in our same misery. Nevertheless, we have been in these studies for 5, 10, 15, and maybe 20 years, maybe even longer. And we're still carrying the same old patterns of thought that we used to have 20 or 30 years ago. So in reality, not much has changed. And because we like to have things quick, because we do not consider the idea of working to eliminate the inhumanity within us, so that as we make that time space, getting rid of the old, we can make time space for the new being the faculties, the attributes, the powers, the forces, the laws of the being. All of those things that make up the soul. So instead of doing that, we would like the easy way out, as if we were thinking that we can talk our way out of the things that for many lives we have behaved ourselves into. And then we reach out and we would like affirmations. And we would like positive affirmations and mantras. And we embrace all of these positive affirmations in social media. And we think that by hitting like or love that we are doing something significant. But in reality, we're not doing anything. Even with all those affirmations, as we wake up in the morning and we think that we are tranquil, that we are serene, that we are peaceful, that we carry love, even in those affirmations, we're saying today is the day that I am going to hit that jackpot. I want to become a millionaire. I want my million, because many people even have dream boards. I want that car and that house, and I want those dollars and all these things. All of these psychological aggregates that we carry within, they are each one of them looking for their own interests. And there are egos within you that may not be immediately perceptible. But they will be against you being rich. They will be against you being happy. They would be against you enjoying of the peacefulness that comes from the elimination of the ego itself. And thus you may be thinking $1 million, $1 million. And that thought goes in one direction, and in the opposite direction go 10 or 15 or 100 different psychological aggregates, justifying why is it that that is bad and you shouldn't have it. And thus the $1 million never materializes. Many people would try to put forth thoughts saying, today I will not be angry, today I will be tolerant, today I will be compassionate, and they will say all those things. And nevertheless, within the subconsciousness, the infraconsciousness, the hatred for others, still alive and kicking. The resentment towards their family, their spouse, their children, their boss at work, their social status, their current financial situation, etc., is very alive. And thus, those positive affirmations go in one direction, and in the complete opposite direction, many other defects against it. And thus, they say those affirmations looking at themselves in the mirror, They get in the car, they get to work, they open the first email, and there is something there that they don't like, and their day is ruined. From that moment forward, no more compassion, no more tolerance, no more nothing. This is what happens. So we must take advantage of this voice of the consciousness that is speaking within us. Because within the message of that verb of silence is the essence of the Savior that is seeking to save us. We are given an opportunity to be able to embrace this wisdom. But we cannot get the progress that we need to make out of this work for as long as we continue carrying our psychological aggregates. The Gnostic esoteric work is certainly not present for as long as we continue tumbling around our days, going from moments of joy into moments of sadness and despair and suffering and arguments, etc., etc. There is something that has to change. And we cannot state this enough. We cannot rely just on those words of wisdom and those quotes that we come across social media or everything that we see in books or even what we are hearing in these lectures. Because we have to put this wisdom to work. Listen, many of us just feel so inspired by the beauty and the romanticism that is carried in many of these very deep and profound words. We hear things like, you should love God above all things, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. And we will smile and we will say, yes. And if we're on our mobile device, we hit share. We hear the words, do unto others as you would like them do unto you. And we say, that's right. That's the way that we should live life. And yet we don't. We hear the words, love one another as I have loved you. These are the words of the great master. And we say, yes, we go to church and we hear those words on Sunday and we give peace to each other and people get the serotonin rush and you can see their hair standing on their skin and they are so happy. And the moment that they walk out of church, they start gossiping about each other once again. So we feel inspired by the beauty of certain words. But by now, we need to realize and acknowledge that just the beauty of those words is not going to affect the change that has to happen within us. Because that change is only possible through the death of our psychological aggregates, and that is work that has to be conscious work. This is something that we have to do here and now, because if we don't do it, fine, but we have to keep in mind that it is the fifth aspect of our Divine Mother, the one who will be in charge of eliminating that later. Whether it is here and now, in conscious and involuntary work, that we can engage that igneous serpent of our magical powers, Devi Kundalini, to invoke of her powers and say, Divine Mother, take this defect and turn it into cosmic dust. We can do that here now. Or we can just continue living life as if everything were inconsequential. And by the time that we end up consuming our 108 lives, then the fifth aspect of our Divine Mother, not that aspect of our sacred fire, not that aspect of our Divine Mother, but the aspect of her being the terror of love and law, the Kali of the Hindustanis, the Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, that ruler of that realm of hell. She will take care of destroying all of those aggregates because there is no future for the aggregates themselves. Those are creations that we have allowed to exist and manifest, and we have been carrying them for many lives. But when their time expires, that is it, and they will have and will be brought to an end. So the best thing is that we do it here, and that we do it consciously and voluntarily. Friends, as we observe the flow of the ray of creation, as we can see that everything that exists emerges from that realm of Asilut, That realm of creation where everything exists in potentiality. That realm of all of the gods and goddesses, the sacred Elohim. As that ray of creation descends, the very first creation is our innermost. This is why our innermost exists not in the realm of Asilut, but in the realm of Bria, which is the realm of creation. Our innermost, your innermost, her innermost, her innermost. They all exist within the sixth dimension of nature. And our innermost has been created in the image and the likeness of the Father, of our real being, of our Glorian. Our Glorian is that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Our Glorian is that Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, you see? And from our innermost, that is also a divine trinity, being made and created in image and likeness of the Father. He is Atman, the innermost, and he is Buddhi, the spiritual soul, and he is also Manas, the human soul. And it is from the human soul of the innermost, from that Manas, that a spark emanates. And that spark, it carries all of the properties and all of the attributes of our Father, and yet it is not the Father itself. It is like a spark that escapes a bonfire. It has all of the attributes of the fire, but it is infinitely different. And you and I, we all have incarnated that spark. That is the aspect of the innermost that we have incarnated today, the consciousness that emanates from the human soul of the innermost. And if the innermost is created in the image and the likeness of the Father, and the Father is all love, then as a consequence, the innermost is all love, and as a consequence, the consciousness is all a manifestation of love as well. And when we have been using that force to enable creations that are inferior, like what we're doing today, what we have been doing is that we have not only been fractioning the consciousness, but we have also been conditioning the consciousness itself. And because of that, our consciousness continues to be processed by virtue of its own conditioning. So we would like to be able to break away from the suffering. We would all like to be able to reach that goal of achieving the ultimate happiness. But because the consciousness is so fractionated and dispersed within our own defects, it is responding differently by virtue of its own conditioning. But that does not take away that the consciousness is not a manifestation of love. The thing is that if it is a manifestation of love, then we have to understand what is it that love is, so that we can develop the right love for the work. If we revisit the words of the great Master Jesus, when he says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," that requires of us to do something a little bit different, other than just feel the profound significance of the words and stay trapped within the romanticism that comes with it. For us to be able to do unto others as we would like them to do unto ourselves, that means that we have to become conscious of others, just as we have to become conscious of our own selves. Because it is very easy for us to be able to look at somebody else and say, that person, he just likes to gossip. Very easy for us to say that. Then the day that we become accused of gossiping, then we get all bent up. We do not like to hear those words because we feel eluded, we feel hurt, because we consider ourselves like we are too good, that we don't do that. It is always other people. So if we would like for others to treat us the way that we treat them, we need to start by being conscious of our own selves. And if we are saying, oh, that person, they're always gossiping, rather than criticize them, rather than judging them and accusing them, we have to start looking at how often and under how many different circumstances we're constantly gossiping about others. Because the moment that we start seeing how much we gossip about others, we stop accusing others of being loose with their tongue. We need to start becoming conscious of our own selves. When we see words like love one another as I have loved you, rather than just staying within the comfort that those words bring and nothing else happening, we have to take those words and internalize them to realize that we have to make ourselves conscious of our own selves so that we can become conscious of others. Because it says love one another. But how can we love others who are constantly criticizing them? How can we love somebody else if we're consistently thinking that we are better than everybody else? That we are above them, that we have better qualities, better attributes? In all that arrogance, there is no room for love. So it is not until we can get rid of our own arrogance that we can start experiencing and feeling that love for one another. Because then we will then experience that love towards others, the same one that the great master has given us, that our innermost manifests for us. But we have to make ourselves conscious of our own selves so that we can become conscious of others. So if we see somebody and we start saying, that person, they're always stealing. Oh, that's the person who stole this or they stole that. Well, we have to go back and look, how many other times have we been stealing as well? How many times have we stolen ideas? How many times have we stolen the happiness out of people? How many times have we stolen opportunities from the hands of others? How many times have we not taken the dry erase markers from work, the paper from work so that we can use it in the printer at home? That is all stealing. How many times have we not been at the supermarket and we have been grabbing that loose fruit from the produce section? And we have been eating fruit in the supermarket and not paid for it. That is stealing. So when we start seeing those very same defects in our own selves, we stop judging others. And then we can start behaving in that way of loving one another. And what about these words? You will love God above all things, and you will love your neighbor as yourself. The only way that we can love God, our innermost, is by intently working in that internal death that has to manifest within us. Is by working in that Buddhist annihilation, observing the way that our thoughts are reacting before the external impressions that come to us, observing the way that our emotions get affected when those egos are reacting within us. We have to be able to see how is it that we become influenced by those impulses from our instinctive center. All those impulses that have to do with survival, that are either associated to fighting or fleeing. We have to be able to see how is it that our habits get affected. How is it that when we get angry, we start stomping our feet, that we clench our fists? How is it that we grind our teeth? How is it that when we start getting frustrated and annoyed, we start rolling our eyes? Those are all reactions on the motor center. And we also have to see how is it that we are wasting of our creative power? How is it that we are being deprived by the reactions of all these egos of energy that is not available later for our spiritual practice? So when we work in the death of these psychological aggregates, it is then that we can start becoming conscious. Because for us to be conscious, the ego has to die so that the consciousness can become liberated. And when the consciousness is liberated, then we can start making ourselves conscious of our innermost. We can then start becoming conscious not only of the divinity that exists and dwells within us right now, which is the consciousness, the psychic material that we have been given so that we can create and crystallize our soul. We can also start becoming conscious of that trapped consciousness that exists within everyone else. The moment that happens, we start becoming a lot more tolerant. We start understanding the suffering of others a lot better. Whether you believe it or not, what experience will show you is that it becomes a lot easier for us to start putting ourselves in the shoes of others. We can start then seeing things from the perspective of our enemies. But how can we claim today that we know others? How can we go to someone and tell them, oh, I know how they're going to respond to this? Or I know this person very well. How can we even claim that today if we don't even know ourselves? It is very difficult for us, well, we can say it because in fact we do, but it is very difficult for us to convince ourselves that that is indeed true. When we are not willing to go through the effort of descending into our own infernos, that means of revisiting all of those events of the day where we were responding in ways that we shouldn't have been responding. Whether we were being praised and we were responding thinking that we were phenomenal and magnificent, or whether we were being criticized or perhaps ridiculed and we were reacting in very inferior ways as well. We have to go back into those internal infernos and see how is it that we can comprehend each one of those defects. Because when we do that, that is when we truly start knowing ourselves. It is then that we can start knowing others better. Because rather than constantly projecting our defects in others, we can then start seeing our defects reflected in others. And then we can be more charitable. But the thing is that we are convinced that we know about love. And in reality, there are three distinct types of love. The three types of love are the sexual love, the emotional love, and then there is the conscious love. And the sexual love, that one is very easy to understand because that is love that is only bringing people together because of the sexual intimacy. And just being bound by the law of the pendulum, well, there are days that will exist and there are days that it will not exist. And there are days or periods, well, that will manifest and periods, well, they will no longer be interested and they will move on and do other things. So that's that. But then there is the emotional love. And the emotional love is also bound to the law of the pendulum. So that means that emotional love goes from periods of apparent happiness and joy to periods of disgust, sourness. This emotional love is so unstable that today it swears that it will love that person forever. And a bit later, it doesn't want anything else to do with that person. This emotional love goes from this false understanding of love into bouncing out into the realm of hatred. So this is also a very weak expression of love as well. Friends, what we are looking for is for the manifestation of conscious love. Because when we are working arduously internally, and as we seek to comprehend our reactions, the level of the mind, the level of the heart, the level of our habits, we start gaining the necessary information that gives us the comprehension of the defect. And as we comprehend the defect, we can then move into a space of invoking of our Divine Mother and eliminating them. It is when we can comprehend our own defects that we can start breaking that obstacle that is the sense of superiority. Because this belief that we are superior, it is indeed an obstacle to awakening. Just because we may have many books in our library, or because we may have spent many hours listening to lectures, or because we may dominate the material in such a way that we can use our intellect to speak of it as if we were experts, even though we have no experience, that sense of superiority becomes an obstacle to our awakening. Our sense of superiority is the one thing that opens the door to our intolerance. And our intolerance, and a cascade effect, it leads us to criticism. It takes us into a space where it becomes very easy for us to see the problem in somebody else, but we don't see the problem in our own selves. We start becoming executioners, judge, jury, and executioners of everyone around us. So we look at someone and we say, she always dresses like that. She is this or she is that. And we don't see then that lust within our own selves that could be manifest, even worse than what we are seeing in somebody else. We look at someone and we say, they're adulterous. They're unfaithful to their husband or unfaithful to their wife, and they are bad people. We say that. We fail to see how often it is said that we are also adulterous. Because maybe we don't go out there and consummate a relation of infidelity with someone else. But maybe we do it in the realm of the mind. Maybe we're doing it in the realm of the heart. Maybe we're doing it in the mind and the heart through social media. And we're just being hypocrites. So we have to start turning this thing towards ourselves and asking ourselves, what about us? Friend Samael tells us we must transition from one phase to another. Leaving everything behind for the esoteric work must be radical and definitive. We must abandon all worldly things and we must dedicate to the esoteric work. But we will invite you to read that on your own and then to reflect deeply on it so that you can grasp what Samael is telling us with that. Because Samael is not telling us, sell your house, sell your car, go throw yourself in some cave, become a hermit so that you can dedicate yourself to the esoteric work. Because we know that that does not work. We know that we need of living with others so that we can see our defects reflected in the behaviors of others. That way we can see them, comprehend them, eliminate them. So when Samael is saying leave everything behind for the esoteric work, he is very clearly telling us there should be nothing more important to you than doing this work. It doesn't matter if it's sports, if it is the problems at work, if it is the problems and the conflicts at family. It does not matter if it is your political views. All of that stuff, we have to put that aside. He is not saying stop interacting with that. He is not saying go be a pillar in your local community by helping others. And he's not saying don't do that. We just have to move. Where is it that we're putting value, which is in all of these things that we think that define us, and we have to shift that value and put it into the internal esoteric work. You can continue to practice your sport, but you cannot value your sport more than what you value your internal work. As a matter of fact, you should use your sport so that you can find your own defects working. So you can see all of the defects of ambition, so that you can see defects of greed in all those sports that you practice. And as you see them, you can comprehend those aspects and work to eliminate them. You have to start breaking away with our vanity, with our sense of superiority, with our arrogance. We have to break away from that. We have to leave all of that behind. We have to leave those things behind, and we have to transition into the space of the internal esoteric work in a way that is radical and definitive. That means So when you have time to rest, instead of throwing your body on the sofa so that your body passes out because you're so exhausted and tired, you have to be a little bit more watchful. And then rest, but take advantage of that resting time. And because you have created a pause and a break in your day, revisit what has happened during your day so that you can have even fresher memories of what has been going on, so that you can have better memories of how is it that you have been reacting all the way up to that moment, so that you can grasp that opportunity and enjoy of the therapeutics of rest, which is blue time. Invoke of your Divine Mother and make available that creative energy so that you can work on the elimination of those defects. So we have to abandon all of the worldly things. You have to stop being identified with this and that, and rather use our interactions with this and that so that we can extract wisdom and bring them for our internal work. Because when we assume that perspective, we then become capable of stealing the fire out of our own defects. And when we steal that fire, not only we start making them weaker, we start making use of that power for our internal transformation. Samael tells us people, they do not think like that. When he says that, it's thinking like that in terms of the radical abandonment of all these things that we love the most so that we can focus in our internal esoteric work. He says, students, they spend a lot of time between past values and the Gnostic work, forming something incoherent and amorphous. They want to work, but they do not give themselves to the work, and they end up wasting their time. Friends, I cannot right now just but remember, friend that as he was starting with these Gnostic studies some 20 or 30 years ago, he allowed of his arrogance to be manifested in one of those first lectures where he participated. And as part of the story goes that as he was there understanding about the doctrine of the elimination of the ego, he stated, so all that we have to do is eliminate the ego, and with that we awaken consciousness. The answer to that was yes. And he said, so if that's the only thing that we have to do, then all we have to do is just do it. And that's it. There's nothing difficult about this. Some 30 years later, we came across that. And as we heard about his reflection, he stated, I allowed my arrogance to take the best of me. And for the last 30 years, I have not made much progress. So you see, we start bringing in our past values, our old ideas, and our old ways of thinking. We forget that for us to receive this doctrine, we have to become a whole new vessel, a whole new container, so that we can receive the wine of this wisdom. But if we start bringing our old ideas and our old values and everything of no value from the past, and we start trying to tailor Gnosis so that it accommodates to our own beliefs and those things that we would like to see lasting longer because we're enjoying them so much, then we end up wasting our time. And time is something that we do not have much of. So this is what we need to learn about transvaluation. Transvaluation comes from tere and valera. These are two root words that mean a crossover or beyond, and it is assigning value beyond, assigning value over something else. And what Samael is telling us is that we have to radically abandon all of these attachments that we have with all of these things that we believe that define us. We have to break away from our self-importance, our arrogance, and our intolerance. Because when we start breaking away from that, and in everything that we do, we start seeing and finding the opportunity to see how is it that we are reacting mentally, emotionally, habitually. As we observe ourselves, when we start seeing the behaviors of others, we can see our own defects reflected in them. We become more tolerant. We become more compassionate. As we work upon ourselves and we become conscious of our own selves, we can then start becoming conscious of others too. And when that happens, dear friends, we are indeed placing the right value where the value should be applied. Samael tells us that this today does not happen with many priests. And Samael keeps it very specific to the priests, but perhaps in our ignorance, we will give ourselves the leeway of saying priests and pastors and many other leaders of many groups, organizations, and sects. Because why is it that they have so many followers? And Samael is the one who explains this to us. He says they have a lot of followers because they do not offer the doctrine of the Buddhist annihilation. They offer heaven through payments. They offer heaven in ways that are very easy and very convenient. So anyone who has been committing adultery, anyone who has been stealing, all they have to do at the very last minute is go and confess their sins, and they would be admonished, and bam, they're on their way to heaven, and everything is good and dandy. All they would have to do is go to church on Sundays, and church receive whatever they give them. Uh, in lieu of a solid ritual of Eucharist, which in many cases we have learned that is in the likes of crackers, and they will eat that and they think that it's all good and done. But these religious and spiritual leaders do not offer the doctrine of the Buddhist annihilation. And because they don't offer the doctrine of the internal death, of the elimination of our own defects, they offer something that then is very attractive. The promise of heaven becomes then very convenient. And people end up getting their quote unquote passport into heaven. And people like that because we like it when it's easy. And we like it because the ego does not like anything that threatens its existence. So this doctrine is only a doctrine for the few. And we respond in this way because in reality we have become very abnormal. For us, all of these inferior behaviors have become the norm, but that does not mean that they are normal. You would remember from our days in the pre-chamber, as we spoke of the 7 races and we spoke of the transition, the different transitions that the earth was going through, and how is it that the earth was very unstable, and that it needed a means to be able to receive those cosmic energies, and those energies needed to be digested in such a way that the earth could stabilize its cortex. And back then, humanity was given the Kunda buffer organ. And the Kunda buffer organ, that tail that comes out of the bottom of the spine, that tail that today we see as the tail of Satan with an arrow tip pointing downwards, what that allowed to do was to receive those cosmic forces and allow the physicality to digest them in such a way that those energies would be delivered to the interior layers of the planet and help stabilize the planet itself. Because back then, those humanities, what they were doing is that they were dealing with all this chaos, and they were just abandoning their physicalities and remaining within the higher realms of consciousness. They were not giving the planetary organism an opportunity. So the Kunda buffer organ was given to the humans, and it was left there longer than it was necessary. And the effect of that is the egos that we have today. That does not mean that we can blame somebody else for our misfortune. We know that this has been a problem for eons, and yet we have not placed the right value behind the work. Thus, this lecture today. And because we have made all of this abnormal behavior and made it the norm, many of us humans have become subjects of interest. And they have been taken by beings from other planets, not to torture them and not to torment them, but only they're being abducted so that they can be studied. Because as Samael tells us, Earthlings have become such an abnormality. Earthlings have an abnormal psyche, and we are not normal. We live in a constant dream state. So it catches their attention to see those abnormalities on Earth, and they seek to study it and to learn from it without having to go through this very same typical and particular experience. We live in this dream state, and all it takes is for someone to say something that we dislike for us to immediately react. Samael tells us that only happens here. We go to any other planet, what we will see is that people will respect what others have to say, and there will be no resistance to the opinions of others. People would naturally comprehend their objections, and they would allow others to be able to say the things that they must say. And Samael shares with us examples of his interactions with Archangel Anael, the angel Anael, and with Sivananda. With Angel Anael, he says that in one of his interactions with him, he fell into an argument with Angel Anael, explaining how is it that he had some faculties that he thought that he had developed or not. And Anael stated what he was perceiving at the moment and expressed the truth to Samael in his current condition. And Samael says that he then resorted to explaining to him and telling him how things were and how he knew that things were like that. And at the very end of the conversation, Samael says, he allowed me to say everything that I wanted. And by the time that I was done, Angel Anael stood up. He paid a reverence. He turned his back on me and he walked away because he had already stated what he had to say. And he did not put any objections or any resistance to what I was saying. Same thing happened in an experience with Sivananda. Samael shares with us a few days after Sivananda had passed away. He says that Samael was delivering in one of the temples the teaching of the Great Arcanum. And Sivananda had heard that Samael had been doing that, so he presented himself to the temple. And as he was there, he stated that this teaching should not be given out to humanity like that. And Samael immediately stated and refuted the words of Sivananda. And Sivananda, instead of engaging with an argument with Samael, knowing, of course, that Samael being a being of fire, a being from Mars that is behind the forces of action, karma, and law, and war, Sivananda remains then at the back of the temple and he sits down in the lotus posture. And Samael says, all of a sudden I was feeling somebody was scratching my head, looking within. And when I noticed, Sivananda was deep in a state of meditation. And told Sivananda, you are a samjasi of thought. And Sivananda looked at him and said, I have seen your mother. She is well dressed. I know exactly where you're coming from, and I want you to know that I support the work that you're doing, and I will let others know about it. Someone else says that he hugged them. So you see, there's no comprehend. There is total comprehension. There is no resistance. There is no pushback on the opinions of others. And this is what happens when we become conscious. For as long as we do not enjoy of this conscious love that we need to develop within us, we're going to continue trapped within our own selves. So, friends, the time to define ourselves is here. It is time for us to radically abandon all of these things that we feel, that we are convinced that define us. And rather than holding on to that, we need to bring all of that value and put it behind the work itself. Friends, you can still enjoy of your coffee out with friends. You can still enjoy of the work that you do at work. You can still enjoy of your sports. You can still enjoy of your hobbies. But you cannot let those things define you. You have to go through those things and see them as an opportunity so that you can continue to observe your reactions, to continue observing and maintaining that remembrance of self, so that we can comprehend these defects, so that we can ultimately invoke of the power of our Divine Mother, that we can see these defects eliminated, because that is the one thing that will bring us about the expression and manifestation of conscious love. So Samael leaves for us a homework. He says you have to work on eliminating your arrogance, your intolerance, and your self-love. Because arrogance, intolerance, and self-love are elements of superiority, and superiority is an obstacle to the awakening of the consciousness. Friends, as always, we would like to say thank you to all of these sources out of which we get these images, and we can put these lectures together and make them available for you. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been our lecture Transvaluation in our first chamber series. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.